Welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast. My name is Carlos L. Chacon, your host, and this is episode 7. Today we're talking security with Chris Bell. And while there might be some slight overlap with episode 5, today's session really focuses more on some of the encryption components and how we can make our data available only to those folks who we deem worthy. If you're coming from Stitcher today, welcome. We're glad to be on Stitcher. And of course, those of you coming to us from iTunes, welcome. If you like today's session, we hope that you'll leave us a review. We'd like to know how we're doing. If there's some things you'd like to hear in our program, you can hit me up at carlos.chacon@sqldatapartners.com. I'm on Twitter at Carlos L. Chacon, or you can hit the company Twitter account at SQL Data Partners. In today's episode, we talk with Chris about an analyzer tool that he has put together and made available to you. And of course, those will be available in our show notes, which you can catch at sqldatapartners.com/podcast with today's information. So we're glad you tuned in. We do appreciate it. And as always, compañeros, welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
I have with me Chris Bell, who is the owner of WaterOx Consulting that he started in 2012. He spent 18 years in various roles in the public and private companies working with data. And in 2012, he was a finalist for the Exceptional DBA of the Year Award and is coordinating the Washington, D.C. PASS events. He was recognized as a Microsoft MVP in 2014. So, Chris, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So fill in any holes for us. What did I miss? And is there something maybe of a more personal nature you want to share?
Let's see. Well, okay, as you said, WaterOx Consulting, that's my consulting company. It's me. We also have the SQL Saturday in Washington, D.C. coming up in December.
Yeah, if you're in the D.C. area and need a good technical or SQL Server related event to go to, definitely check out the SQL Saturday in D.C. in December.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun with it too. We try to push the bounds every time of what we do and how we have it, make it a fun event with bringing speakers in from all over the world, actually.
So I have been up to that event a couple of times, and I know that people will find it very interesting and definitely an opportunity to learn something. Today we want to talk a little bit about security, right? And I wanted to have you on the show today, Chris, because I go to you ultimately with a lot of my security questions. By my count, dangerous. So by my count, you've gotten over 25 sessions on security at different events, and many of your blog posts are centered around security. One of the things I know that you're working on is yet to be, or will soon be released, and that is your compliance audit check program. So you'll have this compliance audit check program that you'd like to make available for free, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So for those who are looking to understand a little bit better about how their environments might or might not be in compliance, there's going to be a number of checks that are available. And again, this is somewhat still in development, but he will be looking for some people to give some feedback on. And so in the show notes today, we'll make sure that everyone has the link to the current compliance audit check that's available. And you're welcome to check that out. Give Chris some information or some feedback on how it's being used and potentially maybe what you'd like to see in there.
Definitely what you'd like to see. So here, I'm going to hijack this real quick then.
Go ahead.
But yeah, so the concept of this, it's one of the things that a lot of people forget about compliance or forget about security. It's kind of a back thought. And right. I noticed there's a bunch of tools, it's one of those gaps in the industry. Everyone's kind of like, oh, we make it all run fast and it works well. And look at the pretty colors and security. Yeah, we'll wait about that. That's not a concern right now. And compliance as well. Compliance is a big deal. Look at all the data breaches that have been happening. But then the other problem with that is some of the systems are compliant, just compliance rules aren't tight enough. But I think it's really important to know where you stand when it comes to something like compliance. Even if it's not required of you or your company to be compliant, it's worth knowing where you kind of stand on that playing field. Because I know that on my podcast, WalkSpot, if anybody wants to go listen to that one, on mine I talked with Sean McCowan of Midnight DBAs. And I do in my podcast try to bring up when I do interviews with folks like this, talking about the lackadaisical treatment of security breaches and how it happens. And he had a great line where it's not if it happens to you, it's when it happens to you. So I decided I was going to go out and I looked at the different tools that are available, and they range anywhere from $600 to $4,000 per SQL Server instance.
Very expensive.
It gets really expensive just to do what are a bunch of simple checks that you could really go in and just do yourself. Now, I say a bunch of, I mean literally hundreds, if not thousands of checks being done. And so I thought, it'd be kind of neat, kind of like Brent Ozar has the SP Blitz and some other folks, the different checks that do these kind of things. Well, let's create something like that, but for compliance and security checks. And so I started working on that, piecing it together. I do want to get that released. Hopefully, I'll get it out sooner than later. It's one of those, it all seems so simple until you actually sit down to write one of these tools and make it work right.
Sure.
I am writing it all in just T-SQL script to make it easier for anybody that wants it to see or wants to contribute. It's very simple how it's done. No special compiled, .NET or DLLs or C#, none of that kind of stuff. Just written plain T-SQL. So a lot of places should be able to use it as well. Is kind of the hope. But, security is important. And why should you have to pay out the nose to know where you are on the playing field to make sure you are compliant or you are secure enough that, at least your system isn't sitting out there fully exposed to be grabbed and everything taken and walked away.
Sure, it is. You mentioned that sentiment, and there does seem to be kind of a lackadaisical approach about security, about compliance, almost a bit of an afterthought. I think the kind of the standard operating procedure, if you will, is to give user a little bit of permission. If they get an error, you bump up the permission. Maybe make them an administrator, certainly in your database environment, maybe even on the box. Yeah. And then maybe there's that mentality there of, my Active Directory will require them to change their password every, X number of days, or it has to be a certain security, complexity level. And
yes, but we all know that welcome.1 becomes welcome.2. Right? And then 3 and 4. So you just figure out how many months the person's been there and you probably know their password, right?
Right. And so it is, I have not tried that. You've just given me a little idea there, Chris. Oh boy. So there is that idea, right? That maybe we don't pay attention to it as much. I think a little bit of it is that it requires some planning to understand what level of access from an application perspective our users need, and then being able to grant that to them. Unfortunately, I think another component there is we may give a little too much, we may rely a little too heavily on our third-party vendors to implement some of that security. And from my pool...
never assume that the third-party tool is actually tested security, unless it's actually a security device or it's for testing security. And even then, don't trust them.
Right.
You can't. Because if you look at it, anybody out there that's working with software development, right, what's the higher priority? Hit the release date or make sure it's secure?
Sure.
It's hit the release date. Security takes a back seat. Kind of like, no one's really going to dig into it. Odds are, which is true, odds are nothing's going to happen. But if you leave it wide open, you deserve what you get.
Yes. I think my experience is my pool of third-party, apps, I would probably say maybe about a third of them have some basic security implementations in the form of, I create a role, I create a user, I assign permissions to that role based on, what I'm able to do. Updates or deletes or things like that. And then users, based on what their function is at the organization, are then placed in a role. Even something, as simple as that, I don't see a lot of organizations doing that.
It's much easier to create one user ID and one password that everybody can use, because then you set the access once, maintain once.
Sure.
A lot of applications do that. You may log into the application, but in the back end, it's got a standard SQL login. It's using the same one for everybody connecting to this database. Makes it really hard to track down who's doing what. But it doesn't matter because the application works.
Sure. Now, in that instance, hopefully I guess you're relying on the application then to do some of the auditing as far as who's doing what.
One would assume.
Yes. And then even from I would say the management side, right? So there was an organization that you and I were trying to do some work with, and we had some initial discussions with them and presented some information to those responsible for compliance. And it's very, very interesting that ultimately the compliance officer, the words actually came out of his mouth, and he said, well, we have insurance if there's a breach.
Right.
And I'm like,
yes, it's going to be somebody else's problem.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, you had some interesting numbers about, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on that health insurance company that was breached.
Oh, yeah. The whole, name made me forget it. Empire, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Anthem. They're all under the same parent, Anthem. Yeah.
Anthem.
Yeah. I was just throwing the ideas around. I was like, so they had a breach and it was about 80 million customers had their information compromised. We're not going to say stolen or taken or anything. Compromised is the word they use.
Sure.
Basically means it walked out the door and got somewhere. Somebody's got it. And, what their response was, their quote immediate response, which I received 3 months later in the mail, was, we're going to buy every single one of you. We're going to automatically sign you up for credit monitoring and personal information monitoring. Someone stole your ID, someone stole your credit card information. We're going to pay for all that. We're going to give you that free of charge for a year, because we all know our data is only going to be used for 12 months. But what kind of got me with that is if you sit there and think of the cost, even if they got a really big discount, let's say $1 per person per item, you're looking at two different products that are being given here. And they may have even gotten less than that, but we'll stick with $1 because it's an easy number to calculate. That's $160 million that the insurance company most likely paid out. Not the health insurance company, but the actual company they have for the data breach insurance. They're paying $160 million to buy this stuff to give to everybody, when there are steps that could have been taken in-house for far, far less monetary involvement.
Yes,
to have secured things a little bit better. Now, what happened there was a little bit different, where from what I understand, someone got a hold of a DBA password. And so that comes down to, whoa, how do you deal with that? Because the DBA has access to everything, but the DBA shouldn't have access to everything. DBA should have access to what they need to do. And there should be other steps that can be put in place. And I just think that wasn't looked into fully. As I say, our sophisticated security system, it's like sophisticated enough that someone got the DBA password, got in, and did everything they wanted to do. A little bit tricky there, but, and I think that's one of those cases where you got up to an executive level or whatever, sat there and read the little report given to them that said, well, we have a highly sophisticated system because we spent lots of money on it 10 years ago. Nothing's changed since then, or whatever it was. But it's this kind of thing. It's because, you can try to blame management for a lot of stuff, but management really, the stuff trickles up in that case of, it's all okay.
So we're data professionals, right? Folks listening to this are interested in data, managing their data. What would be some good first steps that they could take to help implement some security or to review potentially their environments?
Well, I think the second thing you mentioned there is important: review. To know what's really good. Know what's going on, who can access what. Do you need to be compliant? Are there other regulations you have to follow? Know these things first. Because if you know this, then at least you can start to make a plan of what to do. Right. Security, and that is kind of a touchy subject. It's one of the reasons a couple of the talks that I do don't have demos. Because if I show you how to do something, odds are you're going to go try to do that right away. Well, you may have to be compliant somewhere, and if you do this, you break things or you break compliance, and suddenly your company loses certifications or whatever it is. So you really have to know what you're doing and what's available, and figure out what path you have to go down to get things secured properly.
Yeah, that was my thought is taking time to figure out what is needed. I think we've all been there where we're trying to set up, a new application, third party, right? They've come in, and maybe you're just trying to give them reader-writer, rights, for example. Well, they get an error, right? So then you escalate their permission, right? Or they say, oh, well, we need administrative privileges on the box.
Right. Must be installed as SA.
That's right. Okay. So I think even asking the question, can you help me understand what it is your system needs from the, elevated privilege account so that I can potentially assist you in a different way, or at least so that I'm aware as the person who will be responsible for, maintaining the application, can know more about the information or know more about the system.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Because, I always sit there when I go somewhere and someone's got an application that will put and say, oh, it needs SA accounts. I was like, why? Well, because that's what they say. And so my response is no. And yeah, I mean, it's laughable. It's like, no, right? I'm a DBA. It's what we say, right? Deny everything. It's this thing where it comes in and people are like, no, we need this application. It needs to do this. It's like, okay, so you want to give this application and this third party, whatever they write, permission to control the entire SQL Server, including creating logins, changing security, doing stuff with backups, moving them around, all that. You want to give it that full kind of access to the server. If it's the only thing on the server, fine. Who cares? Odds are you're running only one application on one database on one instance of SQL Server. Yeah, probably not how it's set up. Not nowadays, virtualization. You're probably going saying, I got this massive SQL Server and it's running 50 databases on it.
Right.
For all these little applications. These applications usually don't run into terabytes of size. They sit there at 10, 20, 30, 40 gig, maybe up to 80, 90.
Right.
And that kind of thing. So it gets tricky in there of knowing what has to be done. But that goes back to when you're in a shop that is trying to get applications out and you've got deadlines and time schedules you've got to hit. Security, if you just open it wide up, oh, wow, look, it works. I don't have to worry about whatever's doing. Whatever I wrote, look, it does it in the database. Yay. Sure, right. It has unbridled, unrestricted access to everything in the system. And so a lot of these third party or even in-house, you skip that step of, well, we'll just run it as SA because it does what it needs to do. We don't have to spend time and effort now to lock it down correctly and prevent it from doing excessive things in the system.
In your recent blog post, you talk a little bit about a way that data professionals can know when accounts get created in their environments.
Wow, I did? Cool.
You did, and ultimately you provide an example of a server level trigger, right? But I think kind of that concept of knowing, okay, if someone else who you potentially given access to, maybe a vendor, maybe someone else, maybe some other person in your organization, and then they create a user and assign permissions. This is that idea of knowing your environment.
Yeah, be aware of what's going on. Dealing with knowing what's going on with your SQL Server and being a DBA or not being a DBA, it doesn't matter. If you're dealing with SQL Server at all, it's an interactive experience, just like driving is. Believe it or not, driving is an interactive experience. It's not just sit there, set cruise control, grab your phone, check up on Facebook or Twitter, check Twitter, SQL help, right? Reply to everybody. No, don't do that stuff. It's an interactive experience. Be aware of what's going on around you. And so in your database, things like having these, trigger, buzzword crazy, triggers are bad. No, they can be good if you know what they're doing.
Sure.
And they're set up properly. Use the tools that you've got, get other tools if you need to, but ideally use the ones you've got, learn what they can do, and keep track of things like, look, I have a new user suddenly. Oh, there's suddenly somebody with new permission. Oh, somebody changed one of the store procedures in the system. Well, that didn't go through our process. Why did that change? These types of things like that, be aware of what's going on. That's like knowing that there's a semi barreling down on your right side. Maybe you shouldn't change lanes right then.
Right.
Pay attention to what's going on. It may not be right here within, the 10 feet of your car, what's going on, but know what's coming up. Don't look at the 20 feet in front of your car, only the bumper in front of you. Look down the road as far as you can and see what's going on. So you can actually, it's almost a proactive thing. Be a little proactive with what you're doing and know what's going on. Because as was said, all through the 80s by G.I. Joe, knowledge is power. And so knowing what's going on.
G.I. Joe can't be wrong, right?
No, absolutely not, right?
So
knowledge is power.
So, that's right. And so we actually make that a part of our server build process now, adding that server level trigger for when new accounts get created.
Nice.
And then it sends us an email. And so, luckily, it doesn't happen all the time, but it has from time to time. I get an email. You're like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah, who the heck? And not only that, but who the heck made the account?
Sure.
Because if you're the DBA and you're responsible for doing these types of things, it may come down to the whole, wait, how did somebody else make an account?
Right.
Oh, that application, it has SA access. It can create accounts. Somebody went and found this little plugin for it, and now they're creating accounts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about, right, access to systems, right, knowing that information. One of the concepts that is emerging in this security or compliance is this concept of data at rest.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about data at rest, what does that mean? And
it means on the drive.
So on the hard drive.
Yeah, sorry to be blunt, but that's what it is. Data at rest is when it's sitting still, which is on the drive.
What tools are available for us to be protecting that data at rest?
Well, if we're talking SQL servers, well, we can talk generically, encrypting the drive. That's a base level. It may already be done. It works great until someone logs into the server and can just copy everything off the drive because they can see the encrypted drive.
Okay.
So when you get into SQL Server, you start to have some options there, like transparent data encryption is a great one. It does take a little bit of resources because you're asking SQL Server to think more. Once you add in encryption or hashing, anything like that of any type with SQL Server, the CPU process is going to go up. It has to. It has to think now. Well, it has to think more. So nothing comes for free. But transparent data encryption works nicely because it just, it get very simple setup, get your keys, get your certificate and keys kind of set up real quick, turn it on, system in behind the scenes goes to what's on the hard drive and encrypts the entire data file itself. And then it encrypts the log files. It also encrypts tempdb. So you got to kind of watch for that. If you have a really stressed tempdb and you decide, I'm going to turn on TDE, you might start to see some performance issues with that. But it also encrypts the backups automatically. So that's another way the data sits at rest is your backup, right? The data is not moving around. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there at rest. And so, right. This also puts a level of encryption on the backup. Now, what does that gain for you? How does that help protect? Well, somebody grabs your data file, your log file, your MDF, NDF, or your LDF, or your backup, or your transaction logs. They can't do anything with it unless they have the certificate and the keys that you set up initially, which is one of the reasons that if you do set up TDE, don't store the keys and certificates with the backups.
Yeah.
Put them somewhere separate.
Yes.
And off the machine, too. Get them off the machine.
Right. So. The number one rule of starting to set up encryption, right, is in SQL Server, don't lose the keys.
Don't lose the keys. And actually, as soon as you've done anything that requires any kind of encryption, a couple of keys are automatically created in SQL Server. You want to make sure you get those backed up because if you have to rebuild a server, it's really nice to go to a top level and say, yeah, I'm going to restore my service master key. And once I do that, all my other keys kind of trickle down and it's okay because I've recreated my encrypted environment. There's some really interesting diagrams out there. People can Google for it for Microsoft SQL Server, encryption levels and keys and that. I mean, it's like a bullseye with different lines cutting through it is the one that I kind of like. But, you've got 3 or 4, possibly even more levels of security, of key levels and this that can work their way down through, all down to finally getting to your data in SQL Server. But on top of that, there's also what's on the server itself, which is a couple of layers of security. And then your network and the security on top of your network. Security isn't one of those, I'm going to learn it in 10-minute things. And it gets intimidating at times too. I think that's one of the other reasons it doesn't get implemented a lot because a lot of people, that's not their focus. And it is intimidating just how much is there.
Sure. In fact, I had another colleague of mine. We were talking about encryption, and that was his recommendation. He said, "Look, my recommendation is get somebody who does security on a regular basis because it's something you don't want to mess up."
Yeah, it's very easy to go and flip a switch and suddenly nobody can do anything, or flip a switch and everybody can do everything. It's I think there's a fear factor there with a lot of people. It's like, wait, now you're telling me I should protect stuff, but if I mess up, I can't restore any of it. I don't like this. I'm not going to do it.
That's right.
Too much of a risk.
Might be what you call an RGE event, right?
Yes. Resume. Isn't it Grant that came up with that one?
I don't know.
That's awesome.
resume generating events.
Yes, RGEs. There's a lot of those.
So, so I think we talked about database encryption, at the whole database level, of the instance level, right?
Yep.
But we can also encrypt at the column level or table level, right? And there may be reasons or models that we would want to do that instead of encrypting everything.
Absolutely. There's cases that you want to get down more security gets very granular. It's even now with 2016 of some of the stuff with the row access that they're talking about adding in, which we've had ways to do, just kind of clunky to work around it, but there are ways to do it. You can restrict a specific value in a cell on a single column and a single row. You can restrict access to that to certain people. It gets that granular. So we can say we can protect the whole thing and then the whole server and TDE and lock everything down, but we can also go down to this specific table, this specific value, and this specific row and lock that down too. So we can get very granular in there. And there's multiple ways to do that. There's certificates, there's keys, there's passwords. Again, that chart shows all the different ways that all the different levels of security you can put in depending on how tight you want to get with that. But cases where you might want to do that, you're sitting there and it's like, well, let's say we're not using TDE, or let's say we are using TDE, because TDE is at rest. The thing with transparent data encryption is that first word, transparent. If you have access to the database, you see everything in it plain text, just as it's stored. So maybe you're working somewhere, you got TDE, so nobody can grab your data files, your log file, your backups. They can't grab those and just throw them on some other server somewhere. Great. But if they can log into your server, like Anthem had the DBA could just log in, well, you get into that, you got TDE in place, everything looks just normal. So why not write a couple queries, dump all the stuff out, and there you go. You walk away with it. Didn't matter that you had TDE. So you've got to start looking at, then you've got to look at specific information to be protected inside that table or that database. And so let's say social security numbers, real common thing that's taken, credit card numbers. Those you can go down to the point of putting encryption on that column and only giving keys to those that need access to that information. So even if somebody logged in, transparent data encryption is there, they can log in, they can see everything in plain text, but they don't have the key to this column. That column is now scrambled. They can't understand it.
Today, we want to leave you with the impression, right, that there is no one-size-fits-all for security. It will very much depend on, it will depend on your environment, but there are options out there for you. People are, there are some very smart people working on this.
There's no silver bullet, as how I tend to put it. There's no magic button. Click, yay, I'm secure. It just doesn't happen. I see that there's 4 different components dealing with security with SQL Server. The first one is the actual communication. So SSL, TLS, when I'm sending stuff across the wire, that's where I actually sniff the packets on the network and show you everything plain text traveling around. Even from a TDE system, even from an encrypted column, I show you plain text as it's moving around. So how do you protect the connection? How do you protect the data at rest is part 2 that you get in there. And how do we, and not even at rest, but even in that column in there. So you got your connection, you got the database you're protecting, getting down to the cell level with the column encryption as we talked about, get down to that detail level. So I've protected my data streaming. I've protected my data at rest. I protected my sensitive data in the database. And a 4th level that's often forgotten about, and I think is going to start to play a bigger role in here, is Extensible Key Management, EKM. And that's basically an outside source, outside of SQL Server, a source that generates our keys and our certificates and relays them to us. When you look at things like Anthem, someone got the DBA password. Oh, no, they can get at to everything, including the keys that are generated and stored in SQL Server. As the DBA, you've got access to all of them. So you can make backups and restores, and if you can figure out the password, or there's some ways you can kind of work around it. But if I'm using Extensible Key Management where this other piece of software or hardware is generating my keys, I could do things like, say, if the DBA comes in remotely from a non-approved IP address or a non-initial IP, I don't recognize where they're coming from, they can't access the EKM system, which means they can't have the keys. So even as a DBA, if someone took your account and got in there, they still can't decrypt those columns of that sensitive information. It's little steps like that, I think, that when you start combining these 4 components together, the streaming, the at rest, the in the database, and who can get to my keys and how they get to my keys. Once you get those 4 in there, you start to get a pretty tight security system in there.
Thanks for the conversation today, Chris. I think this is going to kind of wrap up our security portion.
Sure.
I think we've covered some great information in trying to provide a little bit of value to folks, right? Get some ideas on what other folks are doing. What's your favorite SQL tool? It can be paid or free, but something that you're using and why you like it.
Well, the ones that I really like are the Redgate suite of tools. And that's not just because I'm a friend of Redgate. I'm a friend of Redgate because I actually love the tools. SQL Prompt is fantastic. If you're not using that, go fight to get it because it makes life so much easier for writing your code and anything that you're doing.
Right. Is there a certain memory or an experience that?
Yeah. It's a favorite experience, favorite DB8 story type thing. Oh boy, those are always hard. It's hard to narrow those down. When I went independent, when I separated off from that corporate world and went independent and had that first client, I was actually contacted by an online retail company that had a new product coming out, and they were expecting for 100 times the amount of traffic hitting their system. Not 100% growth, 100 times the growth.
Oh.
And so, yeah, that was one of those, like when you talk to them, it's like, okay, 100%. Like, no, we didn't say percent. 100 times the traffic. If we had 1,000 people coming per day, we're now going to have 100,000 people. I was like, wow, okay. And they basically said, well, we want to make sure our system can handle it. And that's kind of one of those things, the first thing you'd step into is like, oh, okay. So we did some look at that. I think they were out in Vegas, so I got to go spend a week in Vegas on their dime. But yeah, so I was actually able to get that together, make it happen. They've been going 3 years now, and they haven't had a single glitch at all.
So we're here at our last question. And before we do that, let's hear about another opportunity folks can take advantage of. Hello there, compañeros. I want to tell you about a unique SQL Server training opportunity that is unlike anything you've encountered. And as a listener of this podcast, you're entitled to a special offer. SQL Cruise is a premier training experience set in the most unlikely of places, a cruise ship. Tim and Amy Ford have created a wonderful culture on SQL Cruise. With 5 or 6 technical leads from various industry sectors, you and roughly 20 other students will talk shop in classes while at sea. And while you are in port, you can enjoy the wonderful world we live in, either by yourself or with the group. The beauty of SQL Cruise is the unique relationships you will form with other SQL cruisers. Worried about leaving your spouse? Bring them along. I did, and she had a great time with the group. In fact, I have been on SQL Cruise twice, and I'm looking to go a 3rd time. You may be wondering if this is serious training, and I can assure you it is as good as any conference you will attend on land. It never crossed my mind that I could be talking about SQL Server with several Microsoft MVPs on the beaches of St. John's. I know you must have other questions, so I suggest you head over to SQLcruise.com and check out the site. Once you are satisfied and you want to sign up, when you get to the question, would you be so kind to share the name of who referred you and what source material led you to us? You enter SQL Data Partners, and Tim will ensure you get $100 off the training registration. This is a great offer, and I hope this $100 savings will entice you to check out the site. I did, and went on the Caribbean cruise and had a great experience, and I know you will too. Maybe I'll see you on board. So head on over to SQLcruise.com and use the code SQL Data Partners to save $100. So thanks, Chris, for the discussion today. I hope that folks have found it valuable. I know I have. My last question is, if you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why would you want it?
Oh, just that infamous question, right? So many choices. Good thing it's a superhero power, so it can be like as off the wall as you want.
There you go.
You know what? I'd say teleportation.
Ooh, very nice.
I think that would do it.
So no, this is the Harry Potter kind.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what kind.
Star
Just
Trek
be able to kind of go, pop, there. I'm whatever it is. Just Star Trek isn't really superpower. No, there's Harry Potter, but the ability to sit there and just pop there. Oh, now I'm there. Pop. Oh, now I'm over there. And the reason is it'd be a lot easier and cheaper to get to clients and events. And teleportation would be that superpower.
Well, very good. Well, thanks again, Chris. I had a great discussion. Yeah, it was great fun. And compañeros, I hope to see you on the SQL Trail.
Partners.